The Finance Committee for November 27 will come to order. We'll have a roll call, please.
Mr. Lear? Present. Mr. Legess? Mr. Washington?
Present.
Mr. Hess?
Present.
Mr. Byrne?
Present.
Ms. Weber?
Present.
Mr. Payton?
Present.
Ms. Parker?
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Present.
Mr. Zenz?
Present.
Ms. Haas?
Present.
Mr. Swanson? Ms. DiColo? Mr. Dennell? Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Wheeler? Mr. Searoy?
Present.
We have a quorum.
I have no requests for public comment. Are there any public comments? Any requests for public comment? Seeing no requests for public comment. At this point, we have no presentations. The approval of the minutes for October 23rd. Mr. Washington and Mr. Payton. Any discussion or comments? Hearing none, all that approve the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We go to the Finance Department. Mr. McCarty. I'm on. Good morning. Good windy morning, they say. All right, we start with the miscellaneous financial reports.
I don't have a lot of input, Ian. Good? Okay. There was a bump in sales tax this month. We've been watching that as watching that trend, and as we've discussed, that there was a jump in the unincorporated portion. So we'll continue to watch that. That's on page, or the back side of the front page there. I believe it might have copied different.
Well,
there are 2 pages. Okay.
yeah, the total.
2 pages.
And then the
So we'll continue to watch that, but it was a nice jump. As far as the other taxes, use tax continues to trend up. Income tax is still up. The bed rental is still up. And then we include every couple of months just the trend of the Village of Bradley, Bourbonnais, Kankakee. We've started this a number of years ago. Watching the trend, especially when the sales tax agreements ended and economic reasons, and when we were trying. So it's interesting information as far as other trends in that department. So we continue to do that. So I don't know if there's any questions on that section. That just a quick update before we get into the other information here.
I see no questions from the committee, so let's move to the cash flow.
All right. Yeah, this is a important, positive, important conversation today. We've discussed the possibility of whether or not we need another tax anticipation warrant. We've typically done these anywhere from December through February, that time of year, to help us through the winter and spring months. There's no property tax distribution. So I may start, I included the trends of FY 18, 19, and then you also have the trend of FY 20 included. We won't spend a ton of time on all of them, but just for your reference, if you want to go back and take a look at them. But if you look at FY 20 and then the cash flow summary, which should be the next page to that, yeah, they're the next page. When we watch the trend, we look for the lowest level at the bottom line. So if you look at FY 20 and then look at May, I bolded the ending cash balance for May of 20 at just right at 2.8 million, basically, as the lowest point. And that is not doing a tax anticipation warrant. So when you look at trend, if you look at the summary page, the very next page, you can see through the trend where we ended cash. For example, when we ended November 30, 2015 at 600,000, that snapshot on that day, that was less than a payroll in the bank at that point, because payrolls at that time were still around 950,000 to $1 million for the wire that goes out every 2 weeks. So you can see that I believe we did that TAW, the 4 million in December, and basically had to take 4.6 million all the way to May to June area. So if you look at the estimated, I believe we're going to be a little bit lower at November, but the dollar amounts we're talking about, if they don't show up in November, will show up in December or January. So we're still talking apples to apples. The dollar amounts that we're just about double, what we had at least, a few years ago. We're in the neighborhood of what we had last year with the TAW. So, with the exception of a change in the state government or federal government like we saw last year, we should be okay not to do a TAW this year. So that's great news. I still have a little apprehension saying that just because of what we've been through, but the numbers are showing that we definitely can do that. So like I said, the only thing that we can't control, is if we have payments stop again, and at that point we could react accordingly and have that conversation at that time if that happens, if the feds show up. So I've had a few phone calls from the local banks just asking what we were going to do. We shared that with them and talked about, the what if possibility. We've heard a little bit of that discussion in the news. Whether that'll show back up, we don't know yet. So, but other than that, it's good news that we're still running on our own with some interfund borrowing. So that's all positive news. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot. What I'm watching, what I continue to watch really close, and share a little bit of the trend and where we're at as compared to just a few years ago with you. So, and I'll open it up for questions.
Mr. Seaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, when's the last time we haven't had to borrow? We were racking our brains here in the back row trying to figure out what. It was in
I believe we started in 2012, so 2011.
2011? Okay, because ever since I can remember, we've had to borrow. So I guess that's great work by this board. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, clearly this is something the committee and the board have made excellent decisions, and the guidance from the finance department's gotten through some really tough times, so we appreciate that. Any other questions on cash flow? See, Mr. Ken, let's see, you're on 9 this time. Okay.
Yes. Yep, 6.
You're
it's 9. Sorry, 9.
6 does.
Throws me every time. I assume that we still share information with the bank, that if some catastrophe or something happened, we could immediately tap the local banks for those funds.
Yeah, they're still open and willing to work with us if needed. So we've shared our appreciation for their help getting through the really tough times and sticking with us. As you can see, at some of the numbers, we begged for more, but they did what they were willing to do, and we had to make it work. But we still appreciate, because without it, it would have been a whole different story. So so yes, they are still willing to work if needed. I guess
Thank you.
Is about the best way to phrase it.
although I'd be careful with the word immediately. I think it does take a little time to actually do the process of the TAWs.
Right. Yeah, we have not only through the committee, then the board, and then they have to go through a process with their board. So it does take a little bit of time, but I think we have extra reserves, if you will. So if it did start, I believe we have time to put it all in place, in the proper order without having special meetings and everything. So.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we can move on to the tax levy. Tax levy request. tax year 2019 levy request.
Yeah, worked real close with Eric Blair. He's been providing some great information for us moving forward, and with the estimates that we have, and with the information that we have, and communication with Chairman Wheeler, and as we have done in the last few years, the VAC is getting the largest percentage increase, and then IMRF is second in line. As you all know, as we did, as Anita and I shared with you earlier in the year, we are now upon the change that IMRF is in the increase, and so we adjusted for that. We've also looked at the tort budget real close. To liability insurance is what goes into the tort fund, and that fund, as we discussed last month, has made it back to previous fund balance levels. So we have cut that one back in order to not only save the taxpayer money, but also in any way to share with the other funds as well. So in the whole mix of things, the percentage comes to the change from the total request from this year to the total extension from last year. So it would be a 2.6% request increase in the levy for tax year 2019.
Any questions or discussion? Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see the value of doing this. For one, I think I'm going to be voting no, just for the fact that we had a chance to bring in some additional revenue. At last month's meeting, we chose not to. Instead, I don't feel it's proper to turn away a revenue stream and then put more burden on the taxpayer. And I support these departments and what we need to do, but I'm just explaining my vote.
Other comments, discussion? If there are none, this requires a roll call, doesn't it? Yeah. This requires a roll call vote. We need a motion to accept the tax levy request. Ms. Weber, is there a second? Mr. Washington? Roll call vote then, if there's no discussion.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Nay.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas? Mr. Deno?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Searoy?
Aye.
Motion carries.
We move to budget amendments for fiscal year 19.
That's in there, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, you have the amendment document. So this is amending our current fiscal year. We get some summary and then the detail, both in revenue and expense. Primarily, you'll see a lot of grant adjustments, and also, as I believe the sheriff has communicated clearly, is the increase in local and the out-of-county bed rental activity. So that's there's a lot of grant activity changes along the way. So we're and on the very last page, a few special funds as well that needed some attention with additional activity there. And also there's a specific question. I don't know that there's a lot of other specifics that that come to mind to bring up at this point. This does take a 2/3 vote when you amend a budget by the full board per state statute. So.
Before we have possibly any discussion, is there a motion to accept the amended budget for fiscal year 19? Mr. Danielle? A second? Mr. Searoy? All right, what discussion do we have on the amended budget? take your time to look at it. There's quite a few different categories, and so you have to check those that where the biggest changes are. Mr. Kissinger?
I always look for the biggest numbers, and I see a couple under sheriff non-grant expense and also under corrections. Want to know why there's such a difference between the original budget and now this amended budget?
Well, I think Mr. McCarty had already mentioned about the increase in revenue with the new contract, so that would have been one factor.
I'm talking like the expense side.
Yeah, I mean, it's I did not bring a breakdown, but I believe the sheriff, you know, with what he's communicated, I didn't bring the specifics because usually, you know, the electeds and they communicate to their committee, and he has mentioned the changes in that department, you know, many times here, so that we're following up with the number at this point. So,
Ms. Shira?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as like the corrections go, it's tough to predict, you know, your overtime throughout the whole year, and we have more local inmates now than ever before. So when we have local inmates, those are the ones we have to pay for, and we don't get the bed rental for those beds. So it's a tough figure when you're doing that kind of business, I think, to predict that throughout 12 months. I think we do a great job of trying to narrow it down as much from the trends, but when you add in a factor that you're not really thinking about, like locals population growing, which is good, I guess, but it really hits the bottom line of the expense side of things. So,
Other questions? If there are no other questions, are we ready to move to a vote? I see no other questions. We'll move to a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Dennell? Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Searoy?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Under claim recommendation for not for approval, you have one item listed here. Note that this is not part of the general fund. It's workforce investment money.
It's
Or,
River.
I'm sorry.
River Valley.
River
Enterprise
Valley.
Enterprise Zone.
River Valley Enterprise Zone. The River Valley Enterprise Zone. The original approval that was made for this was 25,000, I believe. So this is under what the original approval was. Is there a motion in regard to this item? We want to move to approve it. Mr. Searoy?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the enterprise zone money not to exceed our previous approved amount.
All right.
It's their money. We just are the trustees of it.
Is there a second? Mr. Zen? Any discussion? Mr. Kitzner?
Refresh my mind, what was the approved amount?
I recall $25,000.
Okay.
See, I thought it was 30, but is it 30?
Uh,
Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Wilson, do you remember?
It was.
It was 30? No, it was 30,000.
We discussed it
Minor.
at PZA 2 months ago, I think. Was it 2 months? 3 months?
Okay.
Weeks seem like months to me, so I don't know. It was.
Sure, his mic's not on.
It
I'm
was.
sorry, your mic wasn't on.
All right, we discussed it in PZA, I think, like 2 months ago. It's there was lights involved in the river over the bridges. It was they had a plan, a website, and something else. And I think they're all still going to do some of those things, but they've changed. They might not be doing the website part of it now. They're doing a marketing part of something for the riverfront. But again, it's not our money. Yeah, it's their money. We just kind of hold on to it for them. So that's the information that I have, Mr. Kinzinger.
If the committee needs any additional information, Mr. Wilson could provide it if you want to hear anything from him. If not, we'll move to a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Ms. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Ms. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Zenz,
Aye.
Ms. Haas, Mr. Dennell,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Seroy,
Aye.
motion carries.
All right, that finishes up Finance Department.
I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Same to you. We'll move to the Treasurer's Office. And as Mr. Africano comes up, could we have a motion to combine and approve the reports from the Treasurer's Office? Ms. Parker, Mr. Dunhill seconds. Any discussion on the reports? Hearing notice, Mr. Byrne.
Oh, nothing. Oh,
Okay. If there is no discussion on the reports, all in favor of the report, say aye. Accepting the reports. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. What do you have for us?
I have very little today, just to say that we will be making final distribution next week. So it'll be by Friday the 6th. Tax year is done, sales over. The levy was, I believe we were 194 million was the levy, and we collected right past 190, 191, I think. So everything's good. I couldn't be happier that looks like we don't have to borrow this TAW. I think this is probably the first year that Steve is actually going to get out of bed for Thanksgiving. So I'm happy for him. And I just want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and a special prayer to our colleague, Mike LaJess.
Okay. If there's nothing more, thank you. The Sheriff's Department, we have someone here from the Sheriff's Department?
Sheriff's here.
Oh, there you are. We got somebody sitting up too tall. Sheriff, come on up. Good morning.
Good morning.
I won't accuse you of flubbing.
I could have been. Good morning. I really don't have, as far as monthly report, you should have gotten a copy emailed to you prior to the criminal justice meeting. We send them out to everybody so everybody's aware. Nothing out of the ordinary, as was mentioned previous, and I guess I'll expound a little bit from on Mr. Kinzinger's question, because it's a good one. And that is from an expense standpoint and the predictability of what we do, because quite frankly, every year is sort of a guessing game, and we try to come as close as we can to where we think we're going to be. The unfortunate part is we don't have control over a couple things that are probably important, that probably cost us the most money, and that is medical care, because we don't know who's coming in with what ailment. And by jail standards, we are required to provide medical treatment to everybody that comes in our facility. And as I've said before I know the Criminal Justice Committee a lot, our medical department does an outstanding job. And some may feel they do too good of a job, because they do things that and I've said this before, those coming into our jail get better medical care than any one of us sitting in this room. And while people may complain about that, ultimately it affects all of us, because quite frankly, it's a public health issue more than it is a jail issue. So you know, our philosophy is if these individuals, because the majority of them, 90+%, end up back on our street, and if they end up back on our street better health-wise than when they came in, our community's better off. And we firmly believe that. I can't say enough about the job that our medical staff does. And then there's those that end up in the hospital. We've had more hospital admissions this year than we've had in years past. And again, that's part of that is that even though we have a great facility, we don't have hospital facilities inside our jail. So we can't, if they're in need of hospital treatment, we can't keep them in our jail. So that takes 2 officers out to the hospital, plus the hospital bills, plus everything else. So as we try to come to a number every year, we don't take into account some of those things. And as Mr. Seroy mentioned, the significant increase in our local number. And as you guys have heard me say before, that is what we're mainly responsible for right now. The out of county, the ICE, the marshals are all, I'd like to say gravy, but I guess that's appropriate Thanksgiving week. So our first priority is our local inmates. And then after that, you know, we house. And I will show you, for those that weren't at the State of the County meeting back in, was that in November or earlier this month? I will show you a PowerPoint presentation about how our locals and our out of counties and what that cost is, since there's particular people out there that think that we don't know what our cost is and what money we're spending. So anyway, that's it on the report, unless you have any questions on it.
Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Chairman. Sheriff, you might want to mention, you've mentioned it, criminal justice, how much money you've saved through the billing.
Yeah, that's a great point. So back in May of 2018, and I don't know if there's any medical people in here, but if anybody who's ever dealt with their own medical bills, they are a nightmare. And especially from the standpoint of as many medical bills as we get through the sheriff's office, through our inmates, we get a bill from the hospital, and I'm sure everybody in this room probably gets their bill and probably sees it and sees an insurance deduction and probably pays whatever they owe. Well, there's actually more to it than that, and we have a young lady who we hired back in May of 2018, and she knows the codes, she knows the billing, she knows more about this stuff than probably everybody in this room combined. And she has, to this point, which I guess would be about 1.5 years, has reduced the amount of money we would have paid another $160,000 plus. So take that number that you just saw and increase that number by not the full 160, because part of that was in 18, but every bill we get, she goes through and she's on the phone, and I'm sure that these medical people probably don't like her very much because she knows what she's talking about, and she goes in and tells them, this isn't right, this isn't coded right, this, and I mean, she's worth her weight in gold as far as saving us money. So, thank you, Bones.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you. Sheriff, great job on that. I work in healthcare, and we actually have in my company someone that does that, and someone like that is worth their weight in gold. How you can go back in the current facility I'm working with, we've done it in the same process, and it's amazing the amount of money you can find with billing, not capturing the charges. Yeah. It's astonishing how much you can find.
It really is, and she, like I said, she goes over every bill we have, and you know, she reduces bills by, and especially when somebody's inpatient in the hospital, those are where your charges get coded wrong or whatever, and you know, she is all over it. And again, it's such a benefit for the entire county. So we're very pleased with what she's doing.
If there's no more on the update, let's move on to request for
Oh, yeah, the transitional audit. So, as most everybody knows, we are, on December 1st, we will have animal control under our department. And we have requested an audit that I know Jake is working on. I don't know where that's at. I know that there's some legal things that he's waiting on, but I guess from and again, nobody is up here saying that there are anything wrong with anything going on. But before we take over a department, we want to make sure that the numbers are right. And I will, I do that just as kind of a CYA. I don't want it coming back a month later saying, oh, hey, these numbers are off for whatever reason. And as I said, we have no reason to think that there's anything wrong with it. But I would expect whoever takes over for me, whatever time that would be, that they would do the same thing, because they don't want to get blamed for something that I did. So I don't know where that is, and I don't know, Jake, if you're going to speak to it today or.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question, because again, I agree with you. As we transition, if there were any issues beforehand, we need to know now.
Yeah.
I am under the understanding that the treasurer's office hasn't signed off on certain aspects of this budget or this item, and maybe Nick can elaborate some more. The cash deposits over the last 2 years, do we need to go back and find out why things aren't matching? And I don't want you to get something handed over to you, and then everyone's going to look at the sheriff's office.
Yeah. Well, they say that anyway.
Mr. Africano, do you want to go to 18?
We hadn't signed off over the last 2 years because transactions were late being reported to my office. I just would like to say that I'm absolutely 100% lockstep with the sheriff. I think that everybody who takes on a department, and I wish it would have been this way when I started, we all start with a blank slate and a zero balance. I think I think that makes sense for the county as well. So,
and I'll second, why weren't we doing audits on this for the last 2 years? That's my question. I guess if there was an issue where we weren't signing off on things, why weren't internally looking at these budget items? That's, I don't know who can answer that question.
I don't have an answer.
Me or?
No.
Yeah, I was going to say, it wasn't my department.
It wouldn't be.
I'll take blame for a lot of things. But
I'm just asking a question. Who, again, we're not having someone sign off on some of that. So to me, it's a red flag, and internally why we weren't looking into it.
I don't have an answer to that question, but just to further enlighten, there were some things that were forced balanced. When you come in, and yes, of course, I hate CYA, but that's exactly what it is. I don't want.
It's not your job to go into that department.
I'm not taking responsibility for anything that was forced balanced before I got here. And when everything else is reconciled in a 30-day schedule, I'm not going to give the treasurer's good housekeeping seal for something that comes in 70 days after the fact and is running behind. So that's all I can enlighten.
Totally agree.
Do we need a motion into some kind of action?
Yeah, that would be great.
I believe a motion might be in order to approve this request. Ms. Parker, Mr. Zinn seconds. Is there any discussion on a motion to approve the request? Ms. Sierra?
What's the audit gonna cost us? I mean, should we hold this discussion till the auditor is on the front, or can we bring the auditor up now, and because he's up next? I mean, he should be a part of this discussion, I believe.
All right, Mr. Lee, would you like to come up front and you can speak to what knowledge you have
Since I'm
on
talking about him
such a
while he's
request?
sitting back here, let's get him up there and let him. I know he's been out there so far, so maybe he's found something.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So as far as the internal audit of Fund 680 goes, we are finishing up some items with that audit yet. As the sheriff alluded to, there are some legal questions that we have, part of which is a jurisdictional question relative to you cannot call it a transition audit. The bill that would have empowered the county auditor to be the person to conduct those audits failed last spring session in the General Assembly. So the current legislation for transitional audit empowers external auditors to perform that task and that duty. So we're looking for clarification from the state's attorney in terms of, can we use other statutory provisions to justify our jurisdiction over this particular process? Because in accounting, there's what's called substance over form, and the form of the audit is one thing, the substance of the audit is another, and so we want to make sure that we're compliant appropriately. As far as some of the things I can talk about that as it relates to the cash balances specifically, the Fund 680 shares a cash account with Fund 330. And so we have to ensure that what is allocated to each fund is correct. And so there was a little more work involved in this audit than we had initially anticipated. So you may hear the term the 10143, that is the general ledger cash account for both of those funds. When we talk about the general fund, you may hear us say the 10122, that's the general ledger cash account for the general fund among probably 40 or so other funds. So that is one of the issues, and I think that may have been part of the reconciliation process that the treasurer alluded to that we're trying to help them work through.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you. So, Jake, let me understand this. The county auditor cannot or audit a county department?
That's not correct.
Okay.
This is specifically for a transition audit as defined by the statute. Okay. And I've inquired of the state's attorney, and I see Nancy just came in. That language is the issue, and that creates a jurisdictional conflict. Part of our audit procedures is to ensure that we appropriately understand the statutory construction and the conceptual framework of our jurisdiction, as well as the requirements for a given fund.
Mr. Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Jake.
Good morning.
I mean, just a school bus driver, so forgive me if I.
My dad was a school bus driver for many years.
He was a good one too.
Yeah.
All right, so the problem here lies of the jurisdiction of the process, not the process and when it's in itself. Is that what I'm understanding? It's a definition term is what's holding us back to whether the sheriff walks into this one with a clean book or not. I mean, you've pretty much done the work, right? Mm. So you can give us a finding if we ask you, like, is it good or it's not good? I mean, that's really where we're at here. I could care less what the definition is. Truly, I mean, I December 1st is Sunday. Mm-hmm. And that's when the sheriff's going to take over. So I just would like to see it done by Sunday without a Webster dictionary to help us out with it. I want you to, if you've done it and I mean, that's really what we want to know as a board. Are we good? Or we got some issues on this part, and then let us know, and then the sheriff knows, or we know, so that's all I'm looking for. I mean, is that what's holding us up?
Sure. So there are a few things. Most of the work has been completed. What I can say is, as far as the cash goes, we do have a number that is based on both the audit and the trial balance as of 11/30/2018, 12/1/2018. And we have reconciled cash through 10/31/2019. So what you have here, one is a timing issue as well, which the sheriff and I talked about this as well, is that we're only going to be able to provide up until October 31st of this current year, right? Because obviously November isn't completed and there's no way we can bring it all the way up to the fiscal year before 12/1. So we can, as long as we don't have legal conflicts where we're putting ourselves in a situation where we're opining on something we don't have the authority to do so, we can provide. We haven't seen anything significant, right? We've seen part of the problem is with those two funds sharing that cash account and one having not been reconciled, you have no way of knowing if the other is truly reconciled. So that's one. That's not a function of our office, but that is a finding. The timeliness in which those activities come from the animal control department, that's another issue that we're finding that impacts this stuff. So to the extent that there's any defalcation or theft or anything like that, we haven't seen any of that. To the extent that there may be incomplete information, and thus things may not be accurately reflected, we have seen that.
Okay, so would a motion by this committee help you finish that job up until even with the sheriff taking over on 12/1, getting the books from, 11/18/19 or 11/30/19, taken forward so that you can make sure that you've got all that stuff covered and maybe report it back next month?
Well, you still wouldn't have, because of the timing of it. Like, you think of our external audit, right, for the county.
Yeah.
That report isn't done until May for the previous fiscal year. So it's not possible to do that. Okay. So that's why we cut it off at 10/31/2019. And then hopefully once we give the treasurer a good number that and there's going to be, so not to get into the weeds, but especially with cash, there will be a decision that has to be made by someone to say everything prior to this date, we're basically saying we're disclaiming, and we're starting with X amount on X date.
Okay.
Now, I will say the good news is the bank actually reflects more cash than what our books show. So there's that.
So you can help us with that number.
We will have a number
right.
that we will say is a reconciled number as a starting point going forward.
Are you, Sheriff, are you good with that?
I am.
Okay.
And I wish my bank showed more money than I do.
Can you give us the name of that bank?
All right.
Well, I guess
Well,
I'll
we do
stay
have
up there.
a motion on the floor. Is that, given the discussion, is that motion something we need to follow through on, or do we need to withdraw that motion? I'm not sure.
I just need clarification. So it's my understanding that our auditor will provide the information necessary for the sheriff to be happy taking over December 1st. Is that the way we've got it?
Mr. Lee, is that your understanding?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
I guess so.
Then-
Or is that fine?
All right. Let's, all right, there we go.
That is sad if you relied on me. The only concern I have is the statute does say that Mr. Lee, I'm sure, kind of cited, is transitional audit. While it's not necessarily been called a transitional audit, it's kind of viewed that way because it's as the future, official who's taking it over is asked that at the time it's being transferred, he wants us to. So that's kind of why. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck. So it's a transition audit, and the statute does say funds managed by county, and keep in mind, this is gonna change January 1st of 2020, so if you ask me this question after New Year's, my answer might be different. But at this time, it says funds managed by county officials, in addition to any other audit required by this division, the county board shall cause an audit to be made of all funds and accounts under the management or control of a county official as soon as possible after such official leaves office for any reason. The audit shall be filed with the county board not later than 180 days after the official leaves office. The audit shall be conducted and the audit report shall be prepared and filed with the chairman of the county board by a person lawfully qualified to practice public accounting as regulated by, and then they state the portion of the statute that regulates that. So you can decide what you want to do. I am just letting you know what the statute has said.
What's the pleasure of the board?
No, we don't. She said we decide what we want to do.
I don't think you have to have an external auditor if we can qualify it under 1005 of the auditor statute, which gives language for internal audit activities and gives us jurisdiction over all funds held with the county treasurer. It's just if you call it a transition audit, that's where you get into trouble.
So just as a reminder, I'm sorry, but just as a reminder, we have no reason to believe that there are any issues.
Yeah, right.
In any way, shape, or form. But again, in case there are, and then maybe when Jake does his thing, at some later point, if there becomes an issue that he says, oh, there's this, and this, then maybe we move for the outside auditor. I don't know that we necessarily have to do that right now.
And that may be how you want to handle
I'm sorry.
Oh, and that may be how you want to handle it. If this is just a situation where your county auditor is auditing funds that are being held by the treasurer, which is part of his responsibilities and duties, if these irregularities do pop up and it causes some sort of concern, then you may want to look into that. If this is just simply the county auditor is auditing your, funds held in the treasury by, officials, and he's looking at them to see what's going on, which kind of has been triggered by the fact that the treasurer hasn't been wanting to certify the accounts. That would be a sign of something you would want your auditor to look into, and that's what he's doing. So once he can bring those concerns to the county board, then it's your purview to order the transitional audit. You're the ones that have to decide to have it done.
Mr. Kissinger?
I move that we have Mr. Lee provide the necessary information that would satisfy the sheriff taking over animal control, and then if he finds any discrepancies or anything, or irregularities, I guess, that at that time we can make a decision whether we want an external auditor.
We'd have to hold on that motion, because we do have a motion on the floor
What's the motion on the floor?
to approve a request for a transition. So does the maker and the second wish to withdraw their motion, and we'll come up with substitute motion?
Agree to withdraw.
Agree to withdraw? Agree to withdraw. So we have now a motion from Mr. Kissinger. Does everyone understand the motion? Mr. Lee, does that seem reasonable? Sure. Is there a second to that motion then? Mr. Seroy is seconding that. Any discussion on Mr. Kissinger's motion? You all understand it? I'm seeing head nods, so we'll assume that you do and you don't have any questions. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quite a bit of difficulty. So we'll move on to the auditor's office. Mr. Lee's here. The monthly claims have been distributed. We need a motion to approve the monthly claims. Mr. Hess moves to approve the monthly claims. Mr. Washington seconds. We'll need a roll call vote if there are no questions. Seeing no questions, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. You have a presentation for us, I understand.
I do.
There's some technical things we need
Yes,
to do here,
there's
so
a
let's
few-
make sure we did that. But
couple of technical items. I have OpenGov with us, and I would like to introduce Mr. Jim Lee here, who's a CPA by training and works this platform. And I'm going to slide over a little. And Works the platform. It's a I learned about this company when I was at a conference in 2008 and 2018 in St. Louis, and our state treasurer, Peoria County, Kane County, just to name a few in Illinois, who use this platform to increase transparency and financial intent of county and municipal governments across the state to constituents. And I really wanted to propose this to the board and let you look at this platform as possibly something we could use to enhance our transparency and efficiency. So.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Finance Committee, and thank you, Board, for having me and OpenGov here. I really appreciate the time here. Again, my name is Jim Lee. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering. Our company is actually based out of California, but I am myself and Matt Cahill is in the back. We're actually out of Chicago office, so we have a pretty big office in Chicago here locally. And I'm here to present to you our OpenGov budgeting and performance solution for government. So I have a couple of slides to go through, and then we'll get into the product demonstration. I have about 20 minutes to present this to you guys, and absolutely, if you have questions, please ask. What we understand from Kankakee County, Illinois, your goals are to really these three things: improve information and data sharing across organization, transparency and public communications, and then improve ability to strategically budget and plan. And these are the things that we find across all the governments that we work with. Our application and organization is designed only for governments. And so the way the technology works, we pull in data from multiple disparate sources into our platform, and then we allow governments to budget and plan, look at operational performance, and do citizen engagement and reporting and analysis around it. And this is what I will walk you through from an application perspective. Our market is only governments. We have about 2,600 plus governments that are actually working our platform across different sizes in terms of governments, but the real value and benefit that they get across the application is really this. So when we look at OpenGov from a application perspective, this is what we find all governments generally go through. Starting from the left, going around to the circle here, if you look at it, they create plan. And as they create the plan, they go through the strategic planning process. There's open town hall, some key stories and so forth. They develop the budget. They look at budget from a collaborative perspective. They adopt a budget. And then there's some historical reporting against budget and actual data. There's some performance reporting around that as well. And then the outcome reports, and then transparency, engaging stakeholders, and the cycle starts all over again. This is exactly what OpenGov is designed to do and help you guys in Kankakee County become more efficient and effective in terms of the way you budget, in terms of the information that you collect, and how you can engage your citizens with that data as well. So a couple of other slides to go through. If we look at the first requirement or first need, improve information and data sharing across organizations, our system, let me just move that, is really designed to pull in all records of data, whether it's financial and non-financial data. You can do trend analysis and get down to transaction level detail as well. And I'll actually show you this as part of the demonstration. When we look at transparency public communications, we can take that data and then push it out to the citizens so they can look at whether it's new things that you're doing from a public transparency perspective, telling the county story in terms of what you're doing with Riverwalk, right? So how can you make that more effective in terms of information that you gather from the citizens, but also relay that information back to the citizens about what the benefit will be for that citizen. And you can even do public surveys within this application as well. So collect information from your citizens to see if that capital project that you have for the Riverwalk or some other things that you're doing are something that the citizens really want. And then that in turn goes back into the planning process. So when you do your budgeting and forecasting and planning, you can see if your allocations and resources are allocated appropriately for the needs of your citizens. And then finally, improving the ability to strategically plan and budget. I mean, this is kind of core to the application where we actually have templates that you can distribute to your departments and collect your budget data and do some really collaborative budgeting within the application. So you can do kind of what if analysis and have different users come into the system and actually look at the budgets and proposals and ensure that the data, the budget that you're collecting and consolidating, it really meets the needs of the county. Again, our focus is only government, and our mission is to really make governments more efficient and effective in terms of the way they budget. We have a lot of counties, about over 2,000 plus customers, actually 2,600 customers. And you can see some counties in this area but across major counties across the United States, but it's also municipalities, cities, and states that we work with as well. So let me jump into the product demonstration and kind of come back and show you a little bit of the product, and then we'll come back to these slides and kind of show you and finish this presentation off. So I'm starting off, if you can kind of see this, let me make this a little bit bigger. This may be a portal page that your citizens can look at. So kind of a transparency or a report, if you will, that you can deliver out to your citizens. This page is public and open to others, anybody to look at. You can also make these reports internal as well. So as I go through this, you'll see how you can use the same data for internal reporting as well as external reporting. So in this particular report, it's a 2019 budget report. It shows me information by revenue, by department. There's budgeted expenses by department as well. So in this particular pie chart, I can see that there's $24 million in revenues that are coming in across general government, public safety, and court services. And then expenses that are being spent at $24 million for public safety, general, and other services as well. If I scroll down, there's actually narratives, and this is a key piece of what we do from a reporting perspective or transparency perspective, because you as the county can put your own story around the data that you're presenting to your citizens. So, hey, what's the benefit of this particular, what's happening with from an expense perspective, if that's what you choose to put out there, or what's the benefit to the citizens about the data that they're looking at? It's not just a pie chart or a graph, but it's actually the narrative and context that goes around it. But as I scroll down, you can see things like operating expenses as well. So here across my different time periods, here's my operating expenses. As I hover across this, you can see the dollar amounts in terms of where the dollar is being spent. And this is live as of the moment that the data is in the system. And then as I scroll down further, you may section it off by different departments: public safety, general government, court services. And then even further down, you can pull in other data as well. So in this case, there's other counties and municipalities that are looking at American Census data. And so we've developed a way to upload your census data into the application. And it's kind of an early warning system, if you will, in terms of how, what is the unemployment within the county? What does the housing market look like, availability, and so forth. And you could pull that data in and, again, use that data to make decisions about your budgeting process. Right, all combined within the application to kind of give you that wealth of information that's needed to make decisions. But let me just kind of drill into this, kind of show you how interactive this is, right? So as we go through this data set, if I look at my expenses by department, as I was listening back there, you kind of see there's some questions about, hey, what's happening with our expenses and so forth. And so the power of the application is really the ability to kind of drill further into that data. So if I click on that particular report or that chart, it takes me into the report that was actually used to build that particular graph that shows me my expenses across different departments. So in this particular report, this is showing me my Kankakee annual report. I can see the departments by public safety, general government, court services. And then down below is a trend that shows me my historical spend. And then further down below is a table of data that actually shows me the data that was used to graph that. I can drill further into this by clicking on any of these members. So if I click on, let's say, public safety, it takes me into the departments that make up public safety, things like corrections, sheriff, police, dispatch, coroners, and so forth, right? So these are the members that make up public safety, and so allows me as a user to get deeper into this data set to do some additional analysis. And the table below will follow that path. Our design is really to make this easy for the users to look at the data, but it's also designed to make it very easy for the person building these reports to create this. It's why OpenGov in terms of government? Our mission is to bring technology, cutting-edge technology to governments to make it easy for them. And why shouldn't government take advantage of the technology that's out there? And so our mission, and our CEO is super passionate about this, which is, hey, let's make this super easy for users to build these reports, but really easy for users to use the data, but really about making actionable decisions based on the data set that you get. It's not just financial data, but it's also operational data, as you saw, citizen data, or census data, and so forth, to pull all that in and then make decisions off of that. So why not have technology to governments? And so that is our mission. We only work with governments, and I'm passionate about this, but we only work with governments because we want to bring that type of technology to government. Right? And so just to give you a flavor for some of these reports, if I look at this report, there's some other reviews here. So things like public safety. As we were talking in the back, we saw this medical billing was a question. Let me just click on this. So this shows me medical billing data. And so the way, by corrections, right? So I can see historically what's happening within medical billing. So very easy to create. And then if I look at the filters, it's so as a user, I can drill into this data. I'm looking at, in this case, corrections data, medical billing. If I wanted to look at by expense type, I can go ahead and look at it by expense type, maybe by funding sources and so forth. So it allows you to select different levels of data and be able to look at the trends and then see it by different cuts of data, whether it's department or expenses and so forth. But we saw that external reporting. If I come back to my reports, there's a whole slew of internal reporting that you can do as well. So we take this data and then put it into kind of a dashboard format. So here's another way to look at that same data set, but making it very easy for the executives and anyone else within the county to look at this. Here's a commissioner's dashboard. So if I look at this particular dashboard, it takes me to all the relevant metrics that the commissioner may be interested in, or this board may be interested in. So things like countywide sales tax, right? So countywide versus county sales tax, expenses by department, court costs by expense types. So these are all data that's in the reports that we saw earlier, surfaced onto these metrics and dashboards. So as you're looking at court costs and so forth, hey, is that effective in terms of the dollar amounts that I'm spending? And then where should I be spending my dollar amounts? And if we look at things like maybe other things like public safety expense data, do we need to hire more public safety officers and so forth, right? So that's the kind of decisions that you would make based on the data that you see here and the trends that you have. And then we can, again, marry that up with any type of data, whether it's financial data or operational data. So for example, let me show you a bigger, so if I look at this side, so the wealth of what you can do here is pretty remarkable. So if I look at this particular set of dashboards, it's not just county executive dashboards, but utilities, sheriffs, financial administration, judges, they can all have their own dashboards, information that's coming in from the system, and then security obviously will give them access to only that set of data that's important to them. The core of this application is really the budgeting side. And so if I look at the application from a budgeting perspective, the application is really designed to collect budget data as well. So it's not just operational data, but operational data that's needed to do better budgeting. So within the application, if you look at this particular screen, we're now looking at budget and different proposals. You can have as many different budgets as you like and so forth, but let me just kind of drill into one of them, public safety. So as we look at the metrics in terms of public safety, hey, we need to hire more officers, maybe crime is high or whatever it may be, we're looking to, or overtime spending is high, we're looking to relieve that overtime pressure. And so we can come into the budgeting side and look at the budgeting templates and then go into the expense side and start to budget for that. So here's my sheriff 911 calls, and then the level of detail that we want to collect. So it's really all designed to collect that level of detail and be able to do better budgeting based on the information that you saw earlier. Part of budgeting is also workforce planning, right? So position planning. So that's a big part of the application from a budgeting perspective. So you can have multiple workforce plans and then look at by individual positions and see what we are paying by position. And then if you can kind of see all the different costs that are projected within the application. And this is all kind of built within the system to allow you to do better budgeting. And then lastly, if I come back to the reporting, let me just show you a couple of examples. Steuben County, they're similar size to you guys in terms of budget. And so they've taken all the budget data that they collected and put it out there publicly for others to see. So if you look at this, here's a budget message summary. You can see information by the county manager, the executive summary, budget, total budget. So they put all of this online. Again, let me make that a little bit bigger. Apologize for that here. So you can kind of see that. So you can kind of see the information that they put online and then the narrative that they have as well, right? So they're putting their narrative and their explanation about the budget data. So when citizens are looking at this, they're not misinterpreting that data. And then you can kind of see things like budget comparisons by category and so forth. But it's not just budget data, but I mean, the platform is very robust and very flexible. So one of the things that you guys are looking to do is, hey, the Riverwalk, right? How do we attract more people within the Riverwalk and what do we have to do there? And so one of the cities that we have, City of Olympia, did something similar. So they put online the walkability of their city, right? So here, things like, hey, here's the information that's out to the citizens in terms of priority, a number of streets that have been completed in terms of, capital assets that have been done to actually build these major streets, and then the parks and pathway utility tax revenue that's expected and from this as well. So there's a wealth of information, and as well as GIS data that's incorporated into this, right, in terms of where that information is at. So a wealth of information in terms of, in this case, the walkability of the city to make it more effective for citizens to want to come into Olympia in this case, right? So that information is out there and available to the citizens. And so that's something that if you guys are doing here as well within the Riverwalk and looking to make some plans around that, why not put that out there and kind of let the citizens and others kind of see the beauty of this particular area and the value that they get. So things like farm to restaurants and so forth, those are things like that people would love to see, kind of know that you guys are doing that kind of stuff out here, and then put that out there to attract people into this county. And so if I look at another one, Minneapolis, right? So they've actually taken a similar approach, but they also have all their capital projects online as well. So City of Minneapolis, if you look at this is a one particular capital project, kind of see the park implementation project. And so they have a lot of detail about this particular project and the costs associated with it. So part of the application is not just operational budgeting or revenue, but you can also do capital projects within the application as well, and look at, hey, what is the cost of it, where's the funding sources and so forth, and then put that online and available to the citizens. And then finally, just the last thing, just the city of Sausalito, cannabis is a pretty big topic these days. And so if I look at this, here's a survey that's been put out there with it using our application to the citizens to collect information. Should there be a recreational marijuana? So this being California, a little bit different from the Midwest, I think. You kind of see allowed, not allowed, and so forth. The citizens are actually going out there and actually participating in this, and then so based on this information, they can do better budgeting around that, and then kind of plan better for the city. All right, so that's my presentation. Let me just go back to just to finish this off. I just wanted to kind of present this to you guys, just kind of show you. I mean, our only focus is government. Our mission is to make governments more efficient and effective, and we want to bring modern technology to government, make it easy for government to build us and use it as well as a citizen. We are a leader in this space as well. Mono County, California, actually saved $2 million using our application, was able to reallocate budget dollars elsewhere. I mean, think about that. So if you think about, hey, we're looking for revenue dollars, why not look at it being more efficient and effective in terms of the way you operate, using information, and then reallocate dollars that way. Here's another, Uvalde County, right? Customers, the modern budgeting system, they were able to save $70,000 by not hiring. Same thing happened in Union County, actually out in Ohio. They recently purchased our application. They had a headcount, but they decided not to hire because the technology itself can help them become more efficient and effective. Why OpenGov? Honestly, kind of leader in budgeting and performance in this space. Innovation in terms of technology brought to our government customers. Purpose built for government in terms of the way we work. Local partnership here in Chicago and Illinois as well. Kind of modern technology again, and over 200 plus governments and staff and experience. So all the folks within the OpenGov, primarily most of the folks that are the accountants or finance or have done have worked in government, and over 200 years, if you will, collectively in terms of the people that's in our company. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. So part of my hope is that we would embrace a platform like this because it will help across departments, across functions, across areas. And, it is, I think it is a very neat tool.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jake, just cut to chase. What is the cost of something like this? It's a nice product, don't get me wrong, but nothing's free. Even open government.
Yeah, so so the cost, a couple of things. One, we don't charge by user. It's actually unlimited user, and partly because, hey, we want to expose, you want to put that data out there to citizens, so we can't collect that information. But also, the other things, we don't charge in terms of hardware or storage. It's based on budget size, but it's also based on the components that you want. So a range with, given your budget size, would be somewhere around $25,000 to $45,000 a year.
Mr. Searoy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lee, thanks for the presentation. I've been to a lot of national conventions, and it seems that technology is kind of surrounding us as consumers at every angle. There's a lot of different technology in my experience in my industry. There's a lot of technology, new technology out there. So I have a few questions for you. Who inputs the data that would be on your platform?
You guys input our customer inputs the data.
Okay,
right?
all right, because and a lot of your users I see look like they had a lot more money than we do, so that would add to our employees' daily workload, and we've kind of stretched that out. I mean, you heard some good news today in this finance committee. It hasn't always been that good. All right, we've had to cut and cut and cut. So that was one of my questions. Now, how long does, is it an annual cost, and is it an initial cost, or is it a subscription? Because I've got technology that I have to have in my industry that it's a subscription, and every year we have an annual fee that has to be, and then they up the annual fee, and I'm at the mercy of that now because of the technology.
Right. It is a subscription cost.
Okay.
And then there is probably a one-time cost to do the implement integration. So going back to the question about data input, on the budgeting side, the budget holders will input. But when we look at historical data, we actually pull and do integration. So in other words, that feed from your source system into our application is automatic, and it happens based on when you guys want to pull that data in. It could be on a daily basis, weekly basis, or monthly basis. So the information that you have is as current as the time it's there. Going back to cost, it is a subscription cost, an annual subscription cost. And there's typically a one-time cost to set up and implement, making sure that the structure and the reports that you want and need are there, and we help you with that.
So I'm going to piggyback on Mr. Burns' question. You said it was about $25,000. So would that be annually?
25 to 45, that's kind of the range.
Okay.
That would be annually.
Annually,
yes.
okay, all right. So, and just like our budget, it's a living document. So this is kind of a living website, kind of.
Absolutely, right.
Sort of thing. It's evolving. It inputs. You input it daily, and numbers change with different departments, so they would input that daily. So that's where my mind's going at, is who inputs the data, and do we get a benefit from the users that see that data to be cost effective for the cost of the data? You know what I mean? That's where my mind's at. I always want to make sure it's cost effective, and I love technology, and I think that's the way of the world, but I'd like to throw mine sometimes just because I'm so tired of it. And no offense to you, sir, because that's your industry, but I'm not sure. We've got our meetings broadcast here. We're live right now, and I'm not sure that we have 200 to 300 people watching in our county at the moment. So what are we going to really grasp the end user, the voter, to see this data? How many of those people are going to be interested in that? That's kind of where I'm at mentally. That's only my questions.
Mr. Byrne?
To piggyback on my first question, now you mentioned 25 to 45,000. Is there an initial startup? Sometimes with software, and I'm in help from healthcare, and there is an annual fee with upgrades of the EMRs and all that, but there's always an initial cost to start.
Right.
Now, what would that be?
That really depends on scope and what we're trying to accomplish, frankly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
But going back to data input, I just wanted to so this architecture diagram, if you will, that pulling data from multiple sources, that's an integration that we help, and that's part of the initial startup as well. So we have done that with about 97 different data sources. We know how to do this. We've done this many, many times across all different types of governments and sizes as well. And we have a pre-built packages, if you will, that allow us to kind of connect the different sources and pull the data in. And so once that's set up, then the data comes in on a nightly, weekly, daily feed, depending on your schedule. And then that data in terms of who gets benefits out of that, it's really either internal users like yourselves or the select pieces of data that you want the citizens to look at. It's really dependent on you in terms of what data, but the analysis that you can do. And I didn't go through all the reports. As we were sitting here looking in the back, I was able to do the medical billing, the overtime budget, the actual report. We actually created that in the back while you guys were talking about this. And I can show you that if you like. So literally minutes to do that analysis versus days or weeks. It gives you more time to do higher level planning and strategic thinking, if you will, versus the mundane task of moving numbers from one spreadsheet to another spreadsheet to another spreadsheet, which is what we find in governments all the time.
Mr. Kinzer.
Yeah, one of the things that I look at in looking at software is the efficiency of the employee and whether I can get more done with less employees. How do you see this approaching the way, and you've got some familiarity with Kankakee County in that I saw this information. How do you see this helping us in terms of our employees working more efficiently, better work environment, and perhaps holding employees rather than increasing the number of employees?
Yeah, that's exactly the story with Union County as well. Like in Ohio, they purchased it only because, hey, we can make it more efficient they can do more with less people. And that's what we're finding across a lot of governments. I mean, because there is definitely a need to kind of use technology to do more, frankly. And so and a lot of that on the finance side is really the analytics of financial data and then being able to do kind of what if scenario analysis, which is pretty big in terms of what I find in our government customers. Hey, what happens if I do a 1.5 tax incremental increase, and what's the impact on the budget data from that perspective? What happens if if there is a major flood in this area? In fact, Nebraska Department of Transportation actually has this flood alert using our system to do that. But what's the impact on the budgetary dollars if there is a weather-related incident here? And how do we adjust our budgets for it? And so that sort of speed needs to happen because there's uncertainty in terms of the economy, uncertainty that we find in terms of kind of weather and so forth. And so technologies like this help you become more effective and efficient in terms of getting information out and making decisions about that. And that's really what it's about. And our mission is really to make this easy for governments to do it. So why should it be like the Wells Fargos or the Citibanks getting benefit of technology when we can have that kind of technology, but making it easy for governments to leverage that? And that's the mission and the core mission and the value that we bring to the table. I don't know if that answered it.
It did.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for? If not, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick question. How many of the customers that you guys have worked with have found savings? I know you pointed to a couple of them, but overall, percentage-wise, what's the percentage of government entities who have been able to find savings by using this program?
Yeah, I would say probably more than half, frankly. If not, it's more about being efficient as well. In terms of savings dollars on the budgeting side, probably more than half. But a lot of it is about bringing information out to their citizens and then making it more efficient in terms of how they report that data out.
Okay. Is there a specific contract length that those entities have to enter into with you guys?
There is. I mean, it just kind of depends. There is a contract length depending on. It could be anywhere from a year to 5 years. It just kind of depends.
Okay.
Yep.
And last thing, how long has this program in your company been around?
The company's been around 8 years. Yeah, so it's been around 8 years, and in fact, it actually started out as a transparency company. And so, if you look at kind of the story of our CEO, he actually was in. He was in the Army and they came out and then was doing looking for some financial analysis at a city they lived in, and they couldn't really get the data to him. And so that's how the technology actually started, because the government that he was at couldn't really get the financial data in time to do the analysis. So it was kind of an aha moment for him. It's like, why can't governments have the technology to make it really efficient for them? And so that's how it started. And then we've evolved into a truly budgeting performance management application company.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Washington.
We talk about eventually the data being almost automatic going into the system. How many data points, how many people will it be necessary to utilize in order to input this data?
Yeah, so once the integration is done, there's really no people needed, because then that's an automatic process that we create.
That's what I thought.
Other questions?
But on the budgeting side, you still have to input, data. So you still need people. I hope that's clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if there's nothing more, make sure I catch everybody this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lee, are there let's see if there's any questions from the committee in terms of your office. Is there anything from Ms. Weber?
I was, thank you. I was just wondering, Mr. Lee, what would you hope happen next with this?
So I would hope that the committee will take this information, consider it, and actually authorizing the county board chairman to sign an agreement with these folks, which would be a financial decision, obviously. So that's what I would hope would happen, because I think that this platform will help us in so many areas, specifically with reporting, that we'll start seeing some of the ROI in terms of what individuals who currently exist in government are able to do because technology frees them up.
Thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Lee? If not, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
We move to other business. First, the GPS juvenile monitoring, Mr. Latham. Tom, come on up, please. I believe this has been before the committee before, or was it just criminal justice? This came up in criminal justice, so you want to give us some background then, please?
Yeah, just give you a little history with GPS in regards, as it relates to juveniles. We had it years ago. It went away with the budget cuts around 09-ish, 2010. We've done without it. We have realized we have gaps in our supervision of individuals on home confinement. We have individuals out during the day and at night, weekends and holidays, but obviously they're not there 24/7. But then recent events, specifically in the city, of individuals or possibly individuals being on home detention involved with shootings and things like that. I've talked to City Chief Cosman several times and Mr. Wheeler a couple times, and this is where we brought this issue back, that this might be a very effective tool in monitoring these individuals 24/7.
Do you have some cost figures?
Yes, I forgot my glasses, so I apologize, but you should have it in your packet. Okay. As you can see, it's $8 a day, $240 a month. We just estimate, unit replacement's $1,400. I put 2 unit replacements in there just to have some budget for it in case it was cut off and thrown in the river. That's happened. So, but the 60 months is just an estimate of, I think that's somewhat a little high. I don't think we'll have that much. And speaking with Mr. Rowe about this, it's juveniles for GPS is going to be a very specific category of offenses. It's just not going to be a broad, you violated home detention, now you're on GPS home detention. It's for specific offenses, a specific category. So I think that'll gatekeep the cost down.
Mr. Hess, was this discussed in criminal justice, and could you speak to it?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We discussed it quite long, and I was the one that thought we should bring it to the Finance Committee so we can get it onto the board for next month. And I'll make a motion, we go ahead and do this.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second? Ms. Haas is seconding that. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked this to criminal justice, so I'll ask this again here. Can we send an invoice to the parents? We're going to be flipping the bill for these kids that are going to be running around who've committed a crime or done something to be, and we're tasked with funding them having GPS. Perhaps the parents should realize there's a cost that goes on with what goes on with their kids, and I think that would be only proper. We may not see a dime out of it, but I think the parents should get an invoice at least to see that there's a cost for us having the.
And Mr. Rowe and I have talked about this, and we're not, the policy written, I think the policy is also attached with it.
Okay.
The procedure, it's not closing the door on that. We even changed the language last week to keep that door open.
Okay.
But just not, adults, it's much easier to say it's a self-pay system. It is what it is. You don't have the money, you don't have the money. Juveniles, it's a little different. But yes, go after, especially any kind of replacement cost.
Sure.
I mean, that's pretty.
Ms. Searoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Latham, are we going to be on the hook for all of this, or is the city of Kankakee going to help out with any of these funds? Because that's a lot of with the juvenile, the new law about juvenile detentions, and they have to be released with, and you know more about that than I do, but they have to be released sooner than what they were being released on. Are they going to help with any of these costs?
Chief Gosman, I've spoke to him several times. He's offered that assistance. This is a countywide system, though. It's just not a city system. But he's offered that financial assistance. I just think that, you know, and maybe we can go that route, but it'd be for a very select few juveniles.
Because I thought in criminal justice, you guys were talking about, or Mr. Rowe mentioned that maybe some of those kids that were out there were out doing crimes, or that had just been released in juvenile detention were out doing crimes the very next day, and he mentioned something about being in the city of Kankakee.
Yeah, the current problem that kind of brought this all back up is in the city.
Okay.
So that's why, you know, that's how it got to this point today. But obviously, it's a countywide system that we'd be using.
Gotcha. So upgrading your system that you've already
we've had this in place for adults for years. We use it for adults. We have, you know, company. We have everything in place. It's just and we had juveniles before. It's just the cost was one of the things we cut originally, and we recognized all along before the situation in the city that we had a gap in our, like I said, they're out checking, but you can't be there 24/7. Even with GPS, you still need our people out because there's other compliance issues they're checking. Who's there? What are you doing? You're home, but what are you doing there, and who's there, and things like that. So they work together. But getting back to your point, yes, he's offered that. I don't know how that necessarily would work. And city paying for a few here and there, I don't know. But
I wonder if we can put that GPS on that OpenGov website, and you can be like, find Pokemon, you know, you can look around.
Mr. Washington.
Maybe there would be the possibility of a set fee, not for individuals, but a set fee coming from the city directly to the county to help offset the cost.
It could. And like I said, Chief and I are talking Monday about it. He's willing to do whatever he can to help. So we just haven't got specific of how that would work. So that might be an option.
I hear that it's a wish of the committee that you investigate that further, but we have a specific motion on the floor, so we're going to have to make our decision on the specific motion. Any further questions on the specific motion? Hearing none, a roll call vote would be needed.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas? Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Searoy?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, we move.
Thank you.
Thank you. We move to the resolution appropriating, well, no, that resolution on the county engineer's salary, we're removing at this time. We don't have all of the information yet. So it'll be authorizing the Kankakee County, I'm having a little hard time reading that one. I'm gonna have to admit, I left my glasses too. It seems like that's a thing today. You've got the next agenda item in front of you. Could we have a motion? Mr. Hess?
I could go back to the county engineer.
Okay.
We bring that directly to the county board at the next month, if he gets that letter in. I mean,
Mike.
It's gotta be due.
Mike.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Could we bring this back up for the county engineer's salary? Because I think that has to be done by by January 1. So could we bring that directly to the county board? If he gets the paperwork and everything in? That's why we sent it to finance.
If it's the will of the committee to pass this on, I think that might be in order. A motion to do that, then I would entertain.
Yes, I would make that motion, that we bring it directly to the county board.
All right.
If the paperwork is in time.
Available. Mr. Washington seconding that. Any questions, any objection to that procedure? I think that might be in order. All right, then, any discussion on that? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right, we go to the next item. Mr. Wilson, can
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that Mr. Seroy's covered this potentially in his motion, but what we're requesting here is just an authorization for the chairman to expend no greater than $30,000 on the agreement between Hitchcock Design for the work done with the enterprise zone funds for the enterprise zone within the jurisdiction. So that way, if it changes $1,000, we don't have to come back to the board each time. I mean, this is enterprise zone funds that enterprise zone body, which Chairman Wheeler is part of, have decided are an appropriate expenditure. The city will be spending, just for the edification of the committee, the city's already spending more than the $30,000. They requested a number of $37,000, and it was at that time the River Valley Enterprise Zone's wishes, the board's wishes, to ensure that they had appropriate skin in the game. So they'll likely be spending more than that $37,000. We're just capping and allowing the chairman with, and again, I think the previous motion might have covered. I just want to clarify with this that what we're requesting now is a motion from finance or action to
sign the agreement,
to allow the chairman to expend the funds up to $30,000, or so if there's an amendment to that agreement, which it was initially $11,900, we would amend it up to 30, which is that number.
Is there a motion to approve the chairman signing this agreement? Mr. Kissinger, Mr. Washington seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, we have money involved, so we'll have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas? Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. The appellate prosecutor program, did you want to, Nancy, did you need to be up here, you feel? This is one that, this is a program that the county's been involved with a number of years, and this is simply a renewal for the upcoming fiscal year. This saves us a lot of money.
I don't really, have you have any questions about some of the things they do for us? But yeah, we do it every year. It's a program we participate in. I think the price maybe went up a little bit, but but for example, we sometimes utilize an attorney through the appellate prosecutor program to help us with our union issues. He's specialized in union issues, and he's won some great arbitrations for us. But it's like $60 an hour, which is a big savings as to what we would pay. So we can utilize those services. If we have to conflict out of cases for various reasons, it goes to appellate prosecutors. So they're a great resource to have. So.
Could we have a motion to approve this expenditure? Mr. Byrne, Mr. Payton seconds. Any discussion on the program or the motion? Seeing no discussion, once again, we're spending money, so we'll need a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Aye.
Ms. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Dennell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Is there any old business come before the committee? Mr. Seroy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked Anita to provide this flow chart for you guys with the new, at December 1, adding accounting into the auditor's office. I thought this was a great visual tool to see how it's gonna go. So I would just like the committee to review it, and if we have any questions, to bring it back for next month's finance meeting, to ask the individual people on the flow chart how they feel about the flow chart. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and it seems like it's got the proper checks and balances to where one person will know what the other one's doing and another person will know what the other one's doing, which I think is always a good thing in case you miss one in the middle. So
Any other old business? Any new business? See no new business, a motion to adjourn. Mr. Hess, Mr. Seroy seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. We are adjourned.